use of the terrain and unconventional tactics. As the days turned into weeks, our initial advantage diminished. They transformed their simple farming tools into weapons, their irrigation channels into traps, and the very landscape that we admired into a labyrinth of resistance. Zorx paused, letting the impact of his words sink in. The hologram shifted, showing images of humans moving stealthily through dense forests, setting ambushes that were devastating in their simplicity and effectiveness. They utilized guerrilla warfare, Zorx explained, striking swiftly and then melting away into the shadows of their world. Our technology allowed us to see them, to track them, but not always to outmaneuver them. They knew their planet, their home, far better than we could ever hope to. A student raised a hand, a young Talkin named Threx, known for his tactical acumen. Professor, could we not have adapted our strategies? Used our superior technology to learn and counter their tactics? Zorx nodded appreciatively at the question. Indeed, Threx, that is a logical assumption. We tried. We adapted our sensors, deployed drones, even attempted to recruit local collaborators. But humans are exceptionally adept at improvisation. When one strategy failed, they came up with another. They were united in their resistance, driven by a fierce desire to protect their home. The holograms now showed more dire scenes for the Talkin invaders' damaged ships, ambush patrols, and increasingly desperate measures being employed. Moreover, Zorx continued, humans are emotionally and psychologically resilient. They fought not just with weapons but with their hearts and minds. They spread stories of heroism and sacrifice that galvanized their people. Each loss on our side became a symbol of their resistance, each victory a Pyrrhic one that drained more of our resources and morale. Clixx, still skeptical but visibly intrigued, questioned further, and what was the outcome, Professor? Did we eventually overcome them? Zorx shook his head, his voice heavy with the weight of historical regret. No, Clixx, we did not. After months of prolonged conflict, the cost became too high and the gains too little. We withdrew, leaving the planet as a symbol of human tenacity and spirit. It was a humbling lesson for us, an acknowledgement that technological superiority is not always sufficient. Respect for and understanding of one's adversary are equally crucial. The lesson concluded, the students left the hall in thoughtful silence, the holograms fading behind them. It was a story that would resonate deeply with them, a reminder of the complexity and unpredictability of interstellar relations and the indomitable spirit of seemingly primitive species. Used aerial assaults or heavy artillery to overcome such fortifications. Professor Zorx nodded at Clix's question, recognizing the tactical curiosity behind it. An excellent question, Clixx. Indeed, aerial assaults and heavy artillery were considered. However, the humans ingeniously covered the area with anti-aircraft defenses and camouflage that made aerial reconnaissance and bombardment ineffective. Furthermore, the rugged terrain disrupted our artillery's effectiveness, absorbing or deflecting much of the impact. The holograms adjusted to show the difficulty of aerial maneuvers in the mountainous terrain, with missiles and bombs often missing their intended targets due to the clever human engineering and natural barriers. The humans were also quick to repair any breaches in their defenses, Zorx continued, and they used the mountains to their advantage, setting up multiple fallback positions. Each time our forces thought they had made progress, they found themselves ambushed from another direction. Clixx and his classmates watched as the simulation depicted Talkin forces caught in a relentless cycle of advance and retreat, their numbers dwindling with each failed assault. The holographic scene was a vivid illustration of the grinding attrition that sapped the invaders' morale and resources. As you can see, Zorx said, gesturing to the ongoing chaos in the simulation, the siege of Rikon was not merely a battle, it was a war of endurance and attrition. The humans used their deep understanding of the landscape and their unyielding spirit to outlast our ancestors. The professor paused to let the scene fully register with the students. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the holographic projectors. Zorx's voice took on a reflective tone. This siege teaches us an important lesson about the nature of conflict. It is not always the side with the most advanced technology or the largest numbers that prevails. It is often the side that can best adapt to the circumstances and endure the longest under harsh conditions. He turned off the projector, and the room returned to its normal state. Let this be a lesson in humility and strategic planning. Never underestimate an opponent based solely on their technological capabilities or initial assessments. Respect their ingenuity and adaptability. The students left the room deep in thought. their perspectives on warfare and strategy profoundly altered. They had learned that underestimating an opponent, especially one as resilient and resourceful as humans, could lead to disastrous consequences. The Siege of Riken was not just a historical event but a symbol of human tenacity and a stark reminder of the complex dynamics of interstellar conflict. Simply bombarded the pass from the air, why engage in such a risky ground assault? A valid question. Zorax responded, pleased with the critical thinking. Air bombardment was considered, but the humans employed anti-air defenses, which were surprisingly effective. Moreover, the goal was not just conquest but capture. Our leaders wanted the settlements intact to serve as examples of the futility of resistance. The simulation showed the talk commanders regrouping, trying different tactics, fence, night assaults, even psychological warfare, but the humans adapted to each with every failed attempt. The talk losses mounted not just in lives but in morale. The humans had something to fight for: their homes, their families, their way of life. They knew the terrain and used it to their full advantage. Continued Zorks. The holograms now showed scenes of human fighters moving stealthily through underground tunnels they had dug beneath the battlefield, emerging behind talk lines to see chaos. This was not just a battle, it was a lesson in the art of defense. Zorax emphasized the siege of Arten lasted for weeks each day, costing us resources and soldiers, but costing the humans nothing more than time. As the siege dragged on, the talk forces became demoralized, their initial superiority overshadowed by the stubborn resilience of human defenders. The images shifted to show the eventual withdrawal of talk troops, a retreat that was harrowing and disorderly under constant harassment from human forces. In the end, the siege was lifted not by force but by necessity. Our ancestors realized that victory was not worth the attrition they were suffering. Brixton remained unconquered, a small thorn in the side of our empire, but a symbol of immense pride and resilience for humans. Concluded Zorax. The students, now deeply in our gross in the narrative, began to understand the complexity of warfare, where victory is not always claimed by the stronger force, but often by the more determined and adaptable one. As the lights in the simulation room brightened, signaling the end of the session, the students left with a newfound respect for strategic patience and the psychological aspects of warfare. Riken was not just a tale of military engagement, it was a testament to human tenacity and the importance of morale in conflict. In the third session, at the Talk Central Academy, Professor Zorks prepared to guide the students through one of the most dramatic turns in the conflict on the Earth like farming planet Rixton. Unexpected counterstrike by the humans. The classroom was charged with an air of anticipation as the young Talks were beginning to appreciate the depth of human strategic thinking. As we have seen, Professor Zorks began adjusting the hologram controls. The siege at Artin ended with our forebears' withdrawal. However, the humans did not simply celebrate their defense, they planned a response that would shift the dynamics of the entire conflict. The holograms now depicted a map of the region around Riken, highlighting several key resource nodes and supply lines critical to the talk forces. Understanding that a direct assault against our superior technology was futile, the humans opted for a strategy of disruption, explained Zorks. The scene in the hologram changed to show human sabotage teams moving stealthily under the cover of darkness. They targeted supply depot, communication arrays, and even patrol ships. Each strike was precise, calculated, took us maximum disruption with minimal risk. The humans knew they couldn't outfight us, but they could out-hink and outmaneuver us, said Zorax. Clicks, now fully engaged, leaned forward. How did our ancestors respond to these tactics? Professor Zorax nodded at the question. Initially, there was confusion and underestimation. Our command believed these attacks to be mere nuisances, but as the strikes grew bolder and more damaging, it became clear that we were dealing with a coordinated resistance, not random acts of desperation. The hologram scenes illustrated the growing frustration among the talk forces as their supply lines dwindled and their operational capability was compromised. Despite their technological superiority, the talks found themselves increasingly on the defensive, reacting to human initiatives rather than dictating the terms of the conflict. Here we see the genius of human strategy. Zorks continued, they turned their weaknesses into strengths. Lacking our advanced weaponry and ships, they used their knowledge of the terrain and their ability to mobilize quickly and silently. The session then shifted to a critical moment in the conflicted, daring raid by a human team on a talk command center. The holograms showed a small group of humans equipped with primitive but effective explosives infiltrating the heavily fortified installation. This raid was a masterpiece of human courage and cunning, said Zorks, as the students watched the holographic humans lay charges and escaped just before a series of explosions rocked the facility. It resulted in a significant loss of data for our forces, further crippling our strategic capabilities. The impact of the raid was clear in the simulation. Talk commanders scrambled to regain control, and their focus shifted from conquest to damage control. This was the turning point. Zorax declared, from here on, our ancestors were no longer conquerors, but survivors struggling to maintain a foothold on a planet that had seemed so easy to dominate. As the holograms faded and the lights in the classroom brightened, the students were left to ponder the implications of the human counterstrike. The lesson was clear: underestimating an opponent, regardless of their technological level, could lead to dire consequences. Professor Zorax concluded the session with a discussion on the importance of adaptability and respect for one's adversaries. Remember, true strength in conflict comes not from the might of one's weapons, but from the resilience of one's spirit and the sharpness of one's mind. The fourth session at Talk Central Academy opened with a sense of gravity. Professor Zorax had prepared the students for a deep dive into the strategic shifts that occurred following the human counterstrike. Today's lesson was about resilience, adaptation, and the eventual human dominance in the conflict, a series of events that had reshaped interstellar military doctrines. Last we spoke, we witnessed the crippling blow delivered by the humans in their daring raid, began Professor Zorax, his voice resonant in the silent hall. Today, we analyzed the aftermath path and the eventual turning of the tide in favor of the humans. The holograms lit up, showing the chaotic aftermath within the Talk command structures. The raid left our ancestors disoriented. Crucial data was lost, and with it the tactical advantage. It was a blow from which full recovery was challenging. The scene shifted to depict the Talk forces attempting to regroup and reinforce their positions. However, the humans, emboldened by their recent success, did not allow them the respite they desperately needed. Recognizing the vulnerability of our forces, the humans escalated their offensive. Zorax explained as the hologram displayed a series of swift, aggressive maneuvers by human forces. They began reclaiming their territories, pushing our forces back with a blend of guerrilla tactics and psychological warfare. The students watched intently as the holographic humans used the environment to their advantage, launching attacks from the dense forests and rugged terrains that had once been mere backdrops to their peaceful existence. Here we see the brilliance of human strategy, continued Zorax. Not only did they use their knowledge of the land, but they also used our previous underestimations against us. They knew we viewed them as inferior, and they turned that arrogance into their weapon. One of the students, a young Talk named Verx, raised a hand. Professor, how did our commanders respond to this shift? Was there no countermeasure to regain control? Zorax nodded, pleased with the inquiry. Our forces tried to adapt. New strategies were developed and fresh commanders were deployed, but the humans were always one step ahead. With every attempt to stabilize our position, they launched counter-operations that were unpredictable and highly effective. The holograms showed several failed attempts by the Talk forces to establish new bases and supply lines, each thwarted by the humans' relentless pressure. This phase of the war was marked by a significant shift in momentum. What began as a series of defensive maneuvers by humans evolved into a confident offensive campaign. As the scenes played out, the narrative took the students through various battles and skirmishes, each illustrating the humans' growing dominance in the conflict. The humans, initially perceived as mere survivors clinging to their homeland, had transformed into adept warriors, dictating the pace and direction of the war. The holographic display culminated in a significant battle where the human forces decisively defeated a major Talk battalion, capturing crucial technology and gaining further strategic advantage. This battle was a testament to their adaptability and courage. It marked the beginning of the end for our ancestral forces on that planet. As the session concluded, the lights in the room brightened and the holograms faded away. The students were left to reflect on the profound lessons of the day: the importance of adaptability, the dangers of underestimation, and the potential for seemingly weaker parties to overturn the odds. Remember, Zorax said, as the students prepared to leave, the true measure of a species' strength lies not in their ability to start wars, but in their capacity to adapt, survive, and eventually to thrive. The humans on Arton taught us that lesson, a lesson that remains relevant to this day. With these thoughts, the students dispersed, the minds filled with new respect for strategic thinking and the complex dynamics of interstellar conflicts. In the fifth session at Talk Central Academy, the atmosphere was tinged with intrigue. Professor Zorax was ready to guide the students through the climactic stages of the conflict on the Earth. Like farming planet Rickon, today's focus was on the decisive battle that not only determined the outcome of the war, but also highlighted the strategic brilliance and indomitable spirit of the humans. As we gather today, Professor Zor sorted, his voice steady and clear, we approached the culmination of our historical journey, the battle that would come to define both the resilience of the humans and the limits of our ancestral strategies. The holograms illuminated the room, displaying the strategic map of Rickon. The main focus was on a large valley that served as the central battlefield. This valley, known to the humans as Freedom Stand, was the site of the final and most significant confrontation between our forces and the human defenders, explained Zorax. The simulation zoomed in on the preparations of both sides before the battle. The Talk forces, though wearied by the continuous human counterstrikes, were determined to make one final push to secure the planet. They amassed what remained of their military might, readying for a battle they believed would crush the human spirit once and for all. On the other side, the humans, aware of the impending massive assault, fortified their positions within the valley. They mobilized every able fighter, prepared traps, and set up defensive perimeters that utilized the natural topography to their advantage. The humans knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, Zorx narrated as the holograms showed the tense moments before the battle, but they were fighting on their home soil for their families and for their future. That resolve was palpable in every step they took as the battle commenced. The holographic display showcased a ferocious exchange of firepower. The Talk forces advanced with confidence, relying on their superior technology and firepower. However, the humans executed a series of unexpected maneuvers. Noticed the use of the terrain here, pointed out Zorax. The humans had cleverly camouflaged their artillery placements, and their snipers were well hidden in the natural folds of the valley. As the Talks pushed forward, they found themselves caught in a lethal crossfire, significantly slowing their advance. The turning point came when the human forces launched a counterattack from the rear, using a series of previously undisclosed tunnels that led directly into the heart of the Talk positions. This move was a stroke of genius. Zorx admitted it disrupted our ancestors' command structure and sowed chaos within their ranks. The battle raged on for hours, with neither side willing to give ground. However, the persistence and ingenuity of the human forces gradually turned the tide. The Talks, overwhelmed and unable to regroup, began to falter. The climax of the battle was marked by a daring charge by the human forces, led by a figure who had later become a legend on Rickon, a young commander whose strategic acumen and bravery inspired his troops to push beyond their limits. The Talks, now broken and disoriented, were forced to retreat. Their dreams of conquest shattered on the fields of freedom. The session ended without the usual discussion. The impact of the human victory and the visualization of their strategies were profound enough to leave the students in contemplative silence, each grappling with the realization of just how decisive and cunning an underdog can be when fighting for survival and sovereignty. The final session at Talk Central Academy was markedly different from the previous ones. There was a somber yet respectful atmosphere as Professor Zorx prepared to wrap up the series on the Earth-like farming planet Rickon. This session was less about battle strategies and more about the broader implications of the conflict, the lessons learned, and the future of interstellar relations. As we conclude our study of the Rickon conflict, Professor Zorx began his tone reflective. We must understand that the end of a battle does not signify the end of its story. The aftermath and the lessons we draw from it shape the future. The holograms displayed not scenes of battle, but the post-war environment on Arton. The imagery showed humans rebuilding their communities, tending to their wounded and mourning their losses. Meanwhile, the Talk forces, beaten and humbled, prepared for their departure from the planet following their defeat. Our ancestors faced a critical decision: how to deal with the failure and the lessons it taught. Zorx explained, "It was a moment of introspection for our species, questioning our approach to conquest and the ethics of our methods." The hologram shifted to show the peace negotiations between the Talks and the humans. These were tense yet hopeful meetings where both sides came to understand the futility of further conflict and the potential benefits of cooperation and mutual respect. The peace treaty signed here was not just a formal end to hostilities, but a commitment to a new way of interacting with other species, said Zorax. For the Talks, it was an acknowledgement of our stakes and an agreement to value and learn from the cultures we encounter rather than dominate them. The students saw images of subsequent joint ventures, cultural exchanges, collaborative research programs, and trade agreements that benefited both species. The humans, with the resilience and strategic ingenuity, became respected members of the interstellar community, while the Talks learned to temper their ambitions with wisdom and respect for others. This conflict, though marked by loss and suffering, brought about significant growth for both humans and Talks. Zorax continued, "It reminded us that true strength lies in diversity and cooperation, not in subjugation and